is joining us live from Seattle. And are you there,
I am here. Hi, everyone.
Cyd?
Hi, I'm here.
Are you there, Cyd?
I am here. I'm
Can you hear me?
speaking. I can hear you, and I'm talking.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
I think we don't. I think we don't hear her.
Hi.
Cyd?
I'll keep talking and saying good morning. Hi from San Francisco. Good morning. Hi.
Technical difficulties.
My microphone is not muted. We tested.
Cyd.
Hi. Hi again. I'm speaking.
I'm wondering if she's in mute. She seems to have another conversation with someone else.
I'm not in
Cyd,
mute.
can you hear us?
Yes, I absolutely can. I'm very, very excited to talk to you.
This is awkward. Jeremy, do you have audio out there?
Hi.
Well, I don't see him actually, but tell jokes? No, no.
I will tell a joke.
Hello?
Oh, hi.
Cyd. Hi. Okay,
Hi.
there we go. Hi. So Cyd is joining us from Seattle, and I believe there's quite a bit of time difference. It's quite early where you are, isn't it?
It's morning. I've had my coffee. Excited to talk to you guys.
Perfect. So Cyd is working for Code for America. And for those of you who don't know that organization, they do some really cool stuff down in the United States. And what they do is they send developers in governments, mostly municipalities, as I understand, to solve problems in communities with technologies. And this sounds very similar to what we're doing. That's why it's very cool to have someone who's doing the same thing down south. And the title of her speech, The Pain of Working Together, is something that we can all relate when working the Web Experience Toolkit. When we're working out in public and having all of our work scrutinized, this is really a learning process. I'm really curious to see what their process and their experience has been with working openly and sharing like that. So without further ado, Cyd Harrell from Code for America.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. My background is in doing remote usability testing, so I think it's quite on point that we had a little usability problem there. But I think we're good now. So if you can advance to slide 1, I am really interested to talk a little bit about some problems that we had in the United States a few years ago. You might have heard that we had an election that did not go so well in terms of determining the winner at a national level. And it all came down to a locally administered ballot design, essentially. So what you're looking at right here, if they've advanced it to the first one, is the butterfly ballot from Palm Beach County, Florida, where all of the controversy around the election of George W. Bush stemmed. This is one of the biggest civic design problems that ever took place in the United States, and we still aren't done solving it. There are 3,000 counties in the United States, which is a level of government just above the municipality, and they each administer their own elections. So those of us who work in civic design here are gathering together, and also in civic technology, gathering together and doing our best to work with each of these governments through persuasion. On this particular problem of the ballot design, I was very proud to be part of an effort started by a woman named Dana Chisnell, back in 2012. And this was right before I joined Code for America. If we can advance to the slide that says Tiny but Mighty. Dana and her collaborators have produced a set of guides to be mailed to every local election official in the United States, explaining good practices for designing ballots and good practices specifically for designing election websites. There were 6 or 7 of us who worked together on the research to figure out how election websites were working for voters and whether they were working for every voter, and what exactly we could put in a 10-page tiny guide that election officials would actually read that could arrive in the mail in an envelope and give them what they needed to do the right job. So we had people who were UX researchers, we had people who were designers, we had people who were ethnographers, we had some people who did front-end coding, all pretty tightly clustered in a similar field. And advance, please. We worked together, unsurprisingly, in a tool that's very field-centric called Basecamp. And we shared files, we versioned things, we talked to each other. Everything went relatively smoothly aside from the procedural arguments that you might expect. So I'm here to tell you that right before I joined Code for America, while a great project, was the last one that I worked on where everyone was clustered within sub-disciplines of the same overall field. If you move forward one slide, I have ended up in a burgeoning field called civic user experience or citizen experience through a career that started with a typical deciding to be a ballerina and moving all the way through a long history of consulting and so forth, where I worked closely perhaps with developers, but with a much less broad range of people than I do at, if you advance, Code for America, where, as my introducer graciously said, we gather together people largely from the technology industry, but sometimes from urban planning, sometimes from ethnography, sometimes from academic disciplines, and we embed them in teams of 3 into city halls in the United States to work together with the public servants there to build software. It's often better software than what they get from government vendors. It's a huge goal of ours to provide citizens with things that are simple and beautiful and easy to use, and that both perform the services that government is supposed to perform and help all those public servants understand the processes that can allow them to work more closely with their constituents and deliver services more easily. There are a lot of cultures that come to this. There are people from open data. There are people whose primary interest is actually in getting government onto open source. So when I started to interact with this world in 2011, I was a little apprehensive. Next slide, please. The first time I went to a hackathon, I was terrified. I didn't know if I would be able to work with everyone who was there. I had never contributed to an open source project in any way, and I wasn't sure if all those hackers were going to welcome someone who came from a fairly obscure subset of design, because actually I'm a user researcher, and so that's something where if I tell a developer who's inexperienced with it what I do, it doesn't always resonate. So I showed up at City Camp San Francisco, and I thought long and hard about what I was going to do before I went there. Would I walk up to teams and try to explain what I did? Would I bring some materials and try to offer a session about what they could do? And what I did in the end was I asked to speak at the beginning of the unconference section and just explained the 2-minute basics of what I did. And I said, I'm here for the first time. I'd like to help, and I'd like to figure out if I can work in a way that works with how you work. Next slide. This went great. I was so relieved. In fact, I was actually mobbed. People came up to me and said, we're figuring out how to let fire departments know everywhere in San Francisco where there is a electric defibrillator inside a building in case of a cardiac emergency. Can you help us figure out how to talk to building guards about where their electric defibrillators are and get them to give us the information so we construct a data set? So it's a little off from what I normally think of as writing a research script, but it was in fact writing a script to talk to humans, and they had intuited from my presentation of what I could do that this might be something I could help with. So I worked half the day on refining a script with those guys, and then I gave a 40-minute presentation on what the basic techniques of user research are, and then after that, I joined a team that was hacking and helped them refine who they thought the user of their app was going to be and work through some basic sketched in Sharpie on 8x11 paper wireframes. I had a fantastic time. It had been a really long time since I had gotten to do that variety of things in the space of the day and gotten exposed to people who thought about and did things in such a different way. This led to a longer path for me, and I ended up joining this great organization, Code for America. Next slide, please. This is our official slogan, that we believe that government for the people, by the people, can work in the 21st century if we all join together to make it work. Our unofficial slogan on the next slide is basically that we persuade through practice, that we work with people together, that we don't just go off and build things for them, but that we go to local governments, to public servants who are experiencing mostly software provided by large enterprise vendors like Oracle and SharePoint and all of those, and we help them work with that better. We help them access some of the free tools that are available now, and we also work with them to build something that addresses a problem in their city that they've been frustrated about. There's another phrase that I won't say out loud, but that you have the initials of there, that's quite important to us, and I think also we adopted it partly from the people at GDS in the United Kingdom, which is that we just do things. We get started. It's a really important practice in working with local governments where in the United States we've had budget cuts over the last 7 years since the financial crisis at a level that have rarely been seen. People are demoralized. People don't feel that they can do something. And so one of the important pillars of our philosophy is that you can throw out some of the best practices if you get something done. This is interesting, the kind of teams that we put together. So I thought I'd share an example with you guys. Next slide. This is the beautiful city of San Antonio. It's in southernmost Texas in the United States, and it's just about on the border with Mexico. Very large city, about 2 million people inside the city limits, and larger metro area around it. They are a historic city. A very famous battle took place there. There's a lot of really interesting buildings in the old Mission and American Spanish styles. And our team there is working, next slide, on helping citizens understand the building codes easily and understand what they can do with their residences and when they are violating codes so that they don't get either fined or they don't get home projects that they want to do hung up. So here's who we've got assigned on the next slide. These are great people, and they come from incredibly different backgrounds. David is a young man from the Midwest of America who never completed college, began working as a production designer for newspaper companies in his teens, tremendous experience in print and some in web, has never, before coming to us, committed any code. Amy Mock is from Lockheed Martin. She actually works on rocket engines and the software that runs them. So she comes from an incredibly standards-based, correct environment. And Maya Benari is a freelance designer and front-end coder who comes from Los Angeles. And Maya works mainly on her own, adapting herself to the environments of whatever her clients are working on. With the three of them, as with many of our teams, we see the really important philosophy of standards-based development come together with the JFDI philosophy. And in some ways, this is a bigger and trickier way to work with everyone than is the contrast between, say, developers and designers, or between, say, developers and researchers, or developers and policymakers. Many of those contrasts are around tools and practices. This one is fundamentally different ways of working, and we strive as we go to strike a balance. Both are important. It's something we struggle with. We see someone start up a beautiful effort and discover later that they've written it in a language that's really tough for a city to adopt or for a different city to adopt. And this really tends to start to meet the road when we're into our second or third year with the project and we're taking it out of the cradle of the city that originally sponsored it and making it adoptable, hopefully nationwide. At the same time, if we were to push standards-based development from the very beginning, we would lose some of the flexibility and some of the connection to the hacking movement that started projects like Fixing the Ballot as groups of individuals who care about their local governments, that started projects like they did in Chicago when Chicago was in a situation where they were forced to close 100 elementary schools. It was a terrible situation for the city, and the information that the city was able to provide was not in a form that was easy for parents to understand. And there were protests, there were incredibly contentious public meetings, people didn't know where the incredibly contentious public meetings were going to be. Very difficult situation. Group of hackers, very much in the JFDI frame, came together, took all the information, and built a website to show what was going on, mapped out which schools were going to be closed, mapped out meetings that were going to happen, provided an incredible service to their city. I don't think anyone probably ever did a hard code review on their code. And in that case, that was great. The fact that they made progress, the fact that they actually did something that nobody else was quite in a position to be able to do, was an incredible win. If we wanted to repurpose that to another city, we might do something even to the extent of rebuilding it from scratch, to bring it into the realm of standards-based development that you guys do such an amazingly admirable job of with the Web Experience Toolkit, and that we are working on with some of our different projects. I wanted to share another story that is one of my favorites. Next slide, please. We should be at a screenshot. This is StreetMix, and StreetMix, which is available at streetmix.net. If you happen to have better than average conference Wi-Fi, I'd say check it out right this second. StreetMix is a tool for redesigning street cross-sections. These are things that really matter to people at the hyper-local level. Are we going to have a bike lane? Are we going to have street trees? How tall are the buildings? Will we be able to have a median where I can board the bus? Public planners have struggled for a long time to involve the members of the neighborhoods in this kind of planning. And it's often has been done before now in a room with a poster board where they put up a street section like this. The thing about StreetMix that's really cool is you can drag and drop all of these elements. And as soon as a multi-city fellowship team collaborated on this and put it out on the internet, it started to get thousands of streets designed. And they started to get flooded with requests. So let's talk about the team a little bit. There were actually 7 people on the team, and they came from all kinds of disciplines, and they came across cities. They were very heavy in the front end side of things. You can tell from the interface of StreetMix, actually, if we go back one slide and then forward again, that it's got a design point of view. This was really popular, and one of the really interesting things that happened was that on GitHub, where of course now we're talking about GitHub instead of Basecamp because we're talking about open projects that are open intentionally, that actually have code associated with them. One day, forward one slide, they got this pull request, which says, you need some other elements, basically, and I've drawn them for you. And this person attached an Illustrator file to their comment and said, I'd like to contribute this other element. And this actually kind of set the team back on their heels. They were excited about it, and quick on the heels of this one came another one that said, you guys need mopeds. I drew a moped for you. So they had a lot of capacity in the team in very different disciplines. They had a couple of people, the ethnographer and the graphic designer, who weren't even working in GitHub with the rest of the team. They didn't have the capacity to do the work that they needed to do inside that framework. So they were working outside in Illustrator. Team thought, this is great. The tools that we have as part of the open software movement don't support what we hope is going to happen. So they started out, next slide, by creating a style guide for people who wanted to illustrate for the product and specifying the kinds of file types that they could contribute and how you could add. And people did add things like greater types of people. So now there are people who have lots of different colors of skin and who have visible disabilities and who look a lot more like the variety of people that you'd see walking around the city. A style guide like this that's very specific and very graphical is hard to publish on GitHub unless you just have it as an image. And this product continues to be a huge success, and if you advance forward, continues to have some of the nicest documentation on GitHub. It's really pretty and thorough, and it's frankly one of the most exciting things that we have done. We have seen several hundred public meetings across the country, more every week, using this as a tool where citizens can show, not just tell, their opinion about changes and make streets and print them out and bring them to the meeting and share them with the planners. One thing I'm a little bit sad about, next slide, is that the team is no longer accepting illustration contributions. And it's simply because they haven't been able to figure out how long-term to make the contributions work without using multiple systems, without involving too much back and forth. There isn't a good way yet. The world of open development hasn't yet provided us all with a good way, or we haven't provided ourselves with a good way to contribute to designs in the same collaborative way that we can all contribute to websites and code together. They're still working on the product. It's not as open as it could be because we can't yet figure out how to work in as cross-disciplinarily as we'd like to. But we're getting there. And one of the things that I feel like I should have known sooner, and I wish I had understood, and that I will share with you, involves a project by our group in Oakland, California. Forward one, please. This is a community group that we work with closely that built a participatory budgeting tool for a city that is particularly stressed. If you heard about the Occupy movement in the United States, some of the most ferocious protests and the most controversial responses happened in Oakland, and that wasn't an accident. Oakland had had some of the most difficult budget cuts and is one of the most diverse cities in the United States economically and ethnically. So it was unsurprising that their recent budgeting has been difficult and controversial, and that citizens have banded together to try and improve that. Every time I saw this tool, I said, this is really cool, you guys. You should do some user research. And they said, oh gosh, I mean, we're coders. That's not something we feel like we have the skills to do. It's not something we are all that comfortable with. And it's funny, because the other side of my world is I work in the user research community, and I talk to people all the time, and so frequently as someone working to improve governments, and I bet you guys get this too, I get, that is so great. That is so cool. I wish I could do it. How do I get involved? And often I would just refer them to one of our community groups and say, oh, you should go to this meeting. You should turn up. They'll find something for you to do. My first hackathon went great. You should do the same. Show on up. What finally clicked for me in terms of bringing non-traditional skill sets into coding projects was when the folks from Open Budget Oakland asked for help, and I had had a parallel conversation the day before. Next slide. With a woman named Andrea Moed, who is an accomplished user researcher who lives in Oakland. And I was finally able to put together the critical thing, which was a bounded and understandable request in her language. So what I asked Open Oakland to say to Andrea, next slide, was not oh, we need some research, we think we need to meet someone like you, but could you have time to conduct 5 short usability sessions for us? And that allowed her to evaluate immediately what was being asked of her and say, in this case, yes. It would have also let her say, no, I can't do 5, but I can do 3. Or, you know, what technology do you want to use for that, or will you let me choose my own? And that made me realize how important it is, as we're working in these incredibly multidisciplinary teams, to ask each other how to ask the question. So the practice that I have been doing is to talk to people outside of my skill set, and in that case, that's often, you know, database people or backend developers, and say, I don't know how to ask this question, but here's what I'm hoping can happen. And if there's somebody who can help me translate, that's one of the best things I can do. And if I can get to a point where I can create a request that is native to the person that we hope will join us, that has the more exotic skill set that might actually push us to the next level, that's where the magic can start to happen. There's also one more interesting thing. Andrea adapted her usual process beautifully and substantially in order to do what they needed in Open Oakland. And that was a sign, I think, of a really high-level collaboration. So I want to call out ourselves as a final example. This is next slide, which should be a group of buttons showing us, this is from the Code for America pattern library. So everything that we do in public by default. And that includes our own website, which you'll find on GitHub, like every other project that we do. It also has a separate branch in the repo of our library for the pattern library, which Clear Left, a great design firm out of Brighton in the UK, built for us. And they initially built it over a project in the course of last fall, 2013. And we have lived with it now for a few months, and we're just wrapping up a repeat engagement with them to, in the open, revise the pattern library, because at Code for America, we have a really diverse level of skill in terms of publishing on the web, and quite a few of our staff members aren't conversant in CSS in a lot of detail. And it's hard for them, even with a pattern library, to do all the things that they want to do to publish pages on our website. And we have a distributed publishing model, which would be a topic for a whole nother talk. There was a blog post 3 days ago from our lead over at Clear Left, Jeremy Keith, who's a wonderful designer who's really prominent in the responsive web design movement. And he talked about, and this really crystallized it for me, he said, well, we're working with Code for America again. We love working with them. We love working in public. I want you all to know that the code we're writing for them is going to look like we're doing it wrong. And this was really big, because he said, you know, they came back to us and they told us that the people that are working with our pattern library over there are comfortable with HTML, but are not CSS folks, and that it's not, they're in, excuse me, it's not those people's entire job to work in code and make the website look beautiful. So contrary to the current doing it right trend of pushing complexity into the HTML to keep the CSS really clean, we just rewrote Code for America's pattern library to simplify the HTML as much as possible. And that means our CSS is going to look ugly, and it's going to be in public. And we wanted to tell you, world, that we stand behind every bit of what we're doing there, because it's serving the people who are doing this. And that is really the lesson that I see over and over again. We have people who struggle working in multidisciplinary teams. We have almost everyone struggle sometimes. It's hard. But for me, the greatest collaboration that you can show your teammates from another discipline is that you will give up some point of professional pride or process to make it work for the team. Whether that is doing your wireframes in Google Draw, which I have done. Whether that is doing your code reviews in some way that's a little less rigorous than you might know. Whether it's working with the JFDI people, the Near Standards-based development person, whether it's really bringing yourself up a little bit if you're a JFDI person, or whether it's writing something ugly when your professional pride would have said, I would like to write something clean and pretty. Those are the kinds of collaborations that get it done. Next slide. We persuade through practice, through working together with people. We strive to always do something more than talking about something. And when it's necessary, we ask that we all do it wrong. So you guys, I tremendously admire what you've accomplished with the Web Experience Toolkit, and I know that there are great things ahead for all of you. And the final slide, I just want to thank you for listening this morning, and I hope you'll keep doing what you're doing, and I will be watching and admiring. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cyd. The one thing that struck me the most is at the beginning of the speech, and this is can be a model for a lot of people out here, is the courage it took you to approach this group of people and say, I want to help, but I'm not sure how. And I think that's a lot of, in many cases, this occurs to anyone who wants to be involved in a project, but are just afraid. So it takes a lot of courage to do this, and it's the first step. And building a community where this kind of stuff is facilitated and welcoming new people, it's really a key to what you're doing and also what we're doing. And also, I forgot what I was going to say. That had to happen once, huh? Yeah. Thank you. It's really interesting too, the exchange that happens when you bring people from this discipline. And I'm sure your developers, your designer learned a lot from the public servant. I'm sure their views of public servants, or probably what they call them, bureaucrats, evolve and change. And they're not, they're not just this group of people who don't want to do work or are not able to do, but they're people who have challenges, and then they're desperate for this help.
Yes, we actually have a number of our fellows go into public service afterwards because they discover how challenging and interesting a job that is.
Thank you very much for joining us. I hope we keep in touch, and we're looking forward to possibly working forward with you on some projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.